by WWF during this event, and it is NDCs, a force for nature. So it presents an analysis of nature reflected in the 55 enhanced NDCs, including the EU, up to May 1st. It's a very interesting report, so I would recommend all of you read it. And why is this timely and important? Timely because today is July 1st, and in 30 days, we have the cutoff date for NDCs to be included in the synthesis report by the UNFCCC. And this is very important for us to have a picture of where the world is at in terms of tackling the climate crisis. And it's also very important that COP26 deliver an urgent political response to that. And of course, nature is a key way of enhancing climate action, and NDCs are an important vehicle for that. This is a very special year. We are having the CBD COP, and the CBD is discussing a new global biodiversity framework. And in the climate space, we want to see more attention to the role of nature acknowledged in the COP text, and also finance for nature in NDCs, because nature in NDCs has various co-benefits. It does not only contribute to the climate side of things, but also to biodiversity and to livelihoods as well. And it's also very important to highlight that very recently we had a joint report by the IPBES and IPCC that mentioned that both crises need to be tackled together. So this is just to frame the interesting conversation and present the great speakers that we'll be hearing from today. First one is Manuel Pulgar Vidal. He's the global lead of the climate and energy practice at WWF International, a former COP president. We will also hear from Andrea Ledward. She's the director of the UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA. We'll hear from Francisca Haupt. She is the executive director of Climate Focus, and Christy Lopez Romero will bring to us the experience of Colombia. She works at the Ministry of Environment in Colombia. And I am Fernanda Carvalho. I am the Global Policy Manager of the Climate and Energy Practice at WWF. Will be your chair for this event today. So over to Manuel to present to us some wise words about nature and NDCs. Manuel, please.
Thank you very much, Fernanda, and thank you to you all for being part of this important event. And let me start by congratulating WWF for the release of this important report in a timely manner, because you have already mentioned, Fernanda, the timing of this document. So we are in a time in which we are converging. We are working in promoting convergence in between climate, nature, and health, and that is fantastic. And probably if we were in a situation in which we should identify a single word for each one of those topics, we can say climate momentum. I think that all what it has been built within this year, half of a year, it is fantastic. And it is creating great momentum to have good decisions by the end of the year in COP26. When we think about nature, probably my word, it could be recovery. So nature is recovering relevance, presence, visibility. I am used to thinking that nature it is as the prodigal son that left the home after 92, but now it is back, no? And it is back and it is taking its leadership to define objectives, to improve their framework, to move the needle in relation to what it should be the objective to reverse nature loss. And when we think about health, I think that the pandemic, it is bringing to us opportunities. So the point is that we are in a time of convergence, and in that sense, this document, it is showing that. So let me start by saying some things about nature. What it is happening with nature? As I've already mentioned, nature it is recovering its relevance and visibility. And fortunately, mostly during this year, we have heard good things and good political support when we think about nature. The G7 communique, mostly of the Minister of Environment and Energy, really demonstrated all that political will behind nature and how much nature, and also because of the identification of the top priorities for the COP26 presidency. So nature is there. Leaders are pushing nature and are helping us to define good objectives in relation to nature. And also when we think about this leaders pledge that was signed by almost 90 leaders around the world, it is clear that the political will is there. What it is not enough clear, at least until now, it is what is that vision that we are trying to achieve when we think about nature. Because as we know, we are in the middle of a discussion, probably in the latest part of a discussion to achieve a new global biodiversity framework, in which the idea of the 30 for 30, it is floating around, in which the idea of living in harmony with nature, that it had been developed before in the former strategic plan of the CBD, it is still there, but in which this concept of nature positive, it's emerging with more traction. But we still need to give more content to the nature positive. If we think that nature positive, it is in some way an equivalent of net zero, we do need to define ways to measure what does it mean nature positive and how it could be achieved. Because it is clear that it is very difficult to track progress in a political process without a clear and measurable vision. So that is something in which we should continue working on. If it is nature positive, let's move our action to give more content to that concept of nature positive. Also, it is important how much non-state actors are starting to move action towards nature. As you know, we started in 2014 with the Lima Paris Action Agenda, with the Climate Action Agenda. And because of these two great champions that we currently have, Gonzalo and Nigel, things are strongly happening with good campaigns, the Race to Zero, the Race to Resilience, the breakthroughs, and many other initiatives and campaigns. It is not exactly the same in nature. Despite that in 2018, we created the Sharm el-Sheikh to Kunming Action Agenda, that for now it is just a portal and a very modest portal. But we know that we do need to have non-state actors supporting this process. But again, for that, what we do need it is to have a clear vision, because probably they would like to know better to where they should move their actions. What is that concept that could frame their main objective by 2030 or by 2050? But fortunately, the Secretariat of the CBD has just convened the Friends of the Nature Action Agenda. It is planning to develop action days, probably action week, I hope, during the Kunming COP15. But so something is happening, and we should take that into consideration. That it is strongly related with all those reports that are connecting and linking well nature with the economy. That is key, friends. If we are not able to explain how much nature loss is affecting our economy, probably we could fail in our efforts to move this forward. So the point is that through the Dasgupta review, and probably more than that, I am a person who believes strongly that we should create some kind of a global commission on nature and the economy that could give more permanent room for a debate on what are those links in a global basis, but also in a regional and in a domestic basis. Because to develop that narrative that it is happening in climate, in my point of view, we are entering into a new climate economy. But the point is, what should we do in relation to nature to be part of that new emerging economy, that it could guide the world for the next 30 years. So it is so important to keep that permanent place, permanent room to debate how can we bring nature more close to the economy. And finance, among some other topics. So nature is there. But the point of this report, it is how much all of that, it could be reflected in the NDCs. And to reflect around that, let me say a couple of things. The first one, it is that we recognize that the NDC, it is currently the most important tool to grounded actions domestically. So that is for sure a statement, a clear statement. we don't have an alternative. In nature, we have the NBSAP, and nobody knows who is in charge of the NBSAP, if countries has presented it, so where they are. No? But with NDC, it is clear. Some countries have already enhanced NDCs. We know that we are not fully on track. We know, as you mentioned, Fernanda, that we do need to continue encouraging countries to finish that. We hope before of the end of this month, so July 31st, because that is the way in which it could be included in the assessment of the UNFCCC. But despite of that, NDCs are that key instrument to grounded actions domestically. And because it is a national instrument, it is the best way to move our global desires into clear implementing domestic action. So in that sense, we do need to continue encouraging countries to include nature into that. But based on that, also what it is important to recognize, it is as NDC, it is a domestic instrument, a domestic tool. It is reflecting the reality of the countries. So I am Peruvian. We know because the updated of our inventory of emission, that 65% of Peruvian emission, it is caused because deforestation and land use. So for sure, our actions, it should be focused on nature, mostly on nature. For sure, we have problems with energy, with transport, with industry, with solid waste, among some others. But 65%, it is land use and deforestation. So in that sense, nature could play a key role in those countries located in the tropical area to address their main emissions. But also it could be a good way to address our adaptation needs. Because in that sense, this report is saying the best way to have or to move into success our actions by including nature, it is by combining mitigation with adaptation objectives. And that is key. And that moves me, and I know that I have less than a minute, that for doing that, what we do need also it is to give clarity around some concepts. Nature-based solution. Friends, not every intervention in nature, it is a nature-based solution. That is clear, and we do need to insist on that. Nature-based solutions has three main values that, in my point of view, are preclusive. So the first thing that we do need to verify, it is if the action it is addressing effectively a societal challenge. And to do that, we do need to identify our actions against some national, regional, or global plan. It could be against the NDC, it could be against our national climate strategy, it could be against our national adaptation plan, but we do need not only to do that, but on the other hand, to define ways to track progress. If the action is not addressing any societal challenge, let's stop. It is not nature-based solution. And I think that the word, it is confusing a lot and saying, okay, let's manage peatlands, let's manage mangroves, and that's it. No, that is the second value. For the first value, we do need to check that societal challenge. In relation to the second value, that it is biodiversity net gain and ecosystem integrity, what we do need, it is to define what are those principles that could verify that we are moving our actions in a sustainable way. In that sense, it is weird that in some way the CBD is not receiving nature-based solutions as a key instrument for the fulfillment of their own objective. And it is probably because we don't need to define targets for nature-based solutions in the CBD. What we do need it is to define principles to secure biodiversity net gain and ecosystem integrity. And the third element, it is for sure the co-benefits and the trade-off analysis. So we do need to give clarity to countries in relation to nature-based solutions, how it should be applied, what are those principles, the importance of the IUCN indicators, among many other elements. Let me finish by saying that fortunately, there are some good reports that are promoting how could we mainstream nature-based solutions into the NDC. I am not sure if you have read this UNDP report with 7 pathways to mainstream nature-based solutions into NDCs. We do need to produce those kind of pieces, because if we want to have more than the, I think 44 countries, no, 55 countries that refer in their NDC to the nature-based solution, we do need to give them tools, ways, and guidance to have them adopting those kind of tools for the fulfillment of their objective. So probably I am short of time, but thank you, Fernanda, and I hope that these ideas could help to frame later discussion with all the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manuel. Great ideas, great points, always very rich intervention that brings to us many, many reflections and things to think about, especially your reflections on nature-based solutions, the role of the CBD, and that we have already lots of material, including this report, to guide us to include nature-based solutions in NDCs. So now over to Francisca Haupt from Climate Focus. Francisca will present the analysis findings and recommendations. So Francisca, please.
Thank you. So let me just switch to the presenter view. Somehow, 1 second. Yeah. Oops. Yes. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. So can you see the slideshow? Yes, now you can see the slideshow. So I'm going to present our results. The study assessed the integration of nature-based solutions in the updated NDCs. And first of all, some background on nature-based solutions. I mean, we've already heard about it from Manuel, so I won't go into detail here. But the idea is to, well, we can't really miss nature-based solutions. It's an opportunity that we have to avert climate change, but to tackle the destruction of nature more broadly, and to do this in a way that also contributes to the well-being of people and of biodiversity. So there are many options around forests, stopping deforestation, but also conserving or restoring blue carbon ecosystems. And some of these mitigation options that don't get a lot of potential actually have even more potential than forest, for example. So our approach was we assessed 55 NDCs, which come from 54 countries, and the EU, 27, so 27 EU countries. Makes 55 in total, and we compared the most recent version, an updated or second version or first version to the previous version. So for some countries where they hadn't actually updated, we just compared to the intended NDC. And we looked at whether they included nature-based solutions in mitigation measures, in adaptation, whether they have numerical targets, what types of ecosystems they mentioned, whether they also consider global processes like the CBD, how they mention the role of indigenous peoples and local communities. And overall, we assessed and compared the previous and the newer version and looked at whether there was an improvement. So our key findings is that out of these 55 parties, 50 include nature-based solutions, 44 for mitigation and 42 for adaptation, 36 for both. This is very positive because it shows an improvement. So for example, for mitigation, 80% mentioned it in their updated NDC compared to 71% in previous NDCs. I'm listing here a couple of countries that included it newly. There were a few that also dropped it, but very few. Out of these 44 NDCs that include mitigation, Manuel already mentioned the importance of being able to quantify our targets. 28 have done that, especially for forest targets. And that means that 6 additional countries have joined that group since the previous version. Only 13 NDCs explicitly refer to indigenous peoples and other local communities for the development, how they have designed the NDCs and also how they're planning to implement it. This is relatively low. Most of the NDCs refer to a broad range of ecosystems, but there's still a bit of an imbalance in that the majority refer to forests, a fewer for agriculture. And the number of those mentioning wetlands has actually increased quite significantly from 8 to 19. Also, the references to marine ecosystems have increased. Also, looking at the parties that have not yet submitted an updated NDC, of 117, 71 have included actions related to ecosystem-based adaptation and conservation. Yeah, let me move on since we're short on time. Here is the regional distribution of references to nature-based solutions in updated NDCs. The circles also show the comparison to the previous one. So the inner circle always shows the previous one, and the outer circle show the updated version. So you can see that there's definitely been an improvement shown in green in North America and Europe, also Argentina and Chile and a few other countries, where in particular in Europe, there hadn't been a lot of reference to nature. So we've gone up from 27% to 91% in the US as well, and in North America. That has been a significant improvement. You can also see on this map that our sample for Africa is actually quite low, with many countries not yet submitting a new NDC. But you can also see that of those African countries that we assess, most of them, all of them had actually had a reference to NDCs in their old as well as their new version. There are a couple of NDCs that have declined in their quality. This includes, for example, Brazil, where we no longer have a quantitative, but only a qualitative target for forests, for example. And there are also some countries like Ethiopia where there is a new NDC, but the document is also relatively short, and there might be a new update prior to COP. I also want to emphasize that we will actually update this analysis closer to the COP. So this map will hopefully fill up. One other important graph is the distribution of by ecosystems. So as I mentioned, there is definitely more attention for forests, and has been in previous and is still in new NDCs, same for agricultural lands. But what is interesting is that the dimensions of wetlands and marine ecosystems have also gone up quite significantly. A few recommendations based on these findings. So for the COP and the UNFCCC process more broadly, we do recommend that any decision should include a clear request to maximize the potential of nature, and that we should use the opportunity to give more formal recognition to the role of nature, specifically for the 1.5 degree target. I mean, we learned that nature can account for at least a third of the solution here. So we should make sure to operationalize that potential in implementation. Another recommendation is to scale up finance based on this potential, commensurate to the mitigation potential. Then for national implementation, the report already has a number of recommendations for what countries can do based on WWF's recommendations. But just to highlight, we want to emphasize that it's really important to prioritize those nature-based solutions that have benefits for adaptation, for mitigation, for sustainable development and biodiversity conservation, and clearly identify these co-benefits. We also recommend aligning with other environmental policy instruments like Manuel already mentioned under the CBD, national strategies and action plans as an example. And we also want to emphasize that it's really important to ensure the participation of stakeholders. Again, maybe also taking the findings on IPLCs, on indigenous peoples and local communities, and the importance of right-based approaches. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francisca. So Francisca gave us a taste of what you find in this very interesting and rich report, and recommendations for the process, and also recommendations for national implementation. That's great. So over to Andrea Ledward now to hear from a UK and COP26 presidency perspective. Andrea from DEFRA, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. And thank you both for this invitation and also for the really excellent report and then the brief presentation. So I was going to talk about three things. First of all, the UK's domestic kind of position on NDC. Secondly, our kind of approach to COP26 and how we will be integrating nature very visibly within the COP. And then thirdly, just talking a little bit about the importance of this report. So just to start, I'm the International Biodiversity and Climate Director here at DEFRA, and I was previously a domestic director. And when I have been around the UK, I mean, it is very clear to me that we are really shifting to embrace nature-based solutions. Up in Cumbria, for example, in the Lake District, following the huge Storm Desmond in 2015, we're now really mapping natural capital assets and ecosystem services to try and better manage flood risk. And I remember going up there and talking to the communities who were very much leading and participating both in the mapping and then the solutions, which obviously included peat restoration and tree planting and unstraightening rivers that have become over-straightened in time, which led to the water gushing down. So it's very powerful when you see it in practice, and it's very easy to see the importance and the role of nature to do things cost effectively and also really inclusively with communities. So in the UK, we've set a legally binding target to reach net zero by 2050, and we've laid legislation for the UK's 6th carbon budget, which would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 78% by 2035 compared to 1990 levels. In its NDC, the UK committed to reduce economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions by at least 68% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, which is the highest reduction target made by a major economy to date. And as has just been said, we've also now included nature-based solutions. So the domestic target is consistent with the Paris Agreement temperature goal to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and pursue efforts towards 1.5 degrees. And through this year's COP, we will urge other countries and companies around the world to join us in keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. Domestically, we know that nature will be a vital part of how we achieve our targets, and new measures and funding have been introduced across the UK. So our 25-year environment plan commits the government to improving the condition of our protected sites and to creating or restoring 500,000 hectares of wildlife-rich habitat in England as part of a nature recovery network, which will help us also deliver the UK's domestic 30 by 30 target in support of the CBD. So this expanded and increasingly connected network of places will be richer in wildlife and resistant to climate change, as well as providing carbon capture and other benefits. We're also legislating in our environment bill at the moment for biodiversity net gain. So every time there's any major nationally significant infrastructure or new housing, there's going to be a 10% net gain in the habitat in that area. We've also got a Nature for Climate Fund supporting us to plant up to 30,000 hectares of trees per year across the UK and restoring 35,000 hectares of degraded peatland by 2025. And we're making major reforms to our agricultural payment system to support the transition to sustainable land use systems, delivering for people, climate and nature. In the future, payments will be given for public goods to farmers and land managers. And we're establishing some very large-scale landscape recovery projects to really restore wilder landscapes. Emissions from peat have now been fully included in the 1990 to 2019 UK greenhouse gas inventory, and we're going to set a longer-term target for peatland restoration as part of the forthcoming net zero strategy, which will be published in the lead up to COP26. The protection and restoration of coastal blue carbon habitats like salt marsh and seagrass meadows also really contribute to the UK government's vision for clean, healthy, safe, productive and biologically diverse seas, as well as having a very important role to play for adaptation, resilience and mitigation. So the UK is a real global leader in ocean protection with 38% of UK waters in marine protected areas, covering the majority of our salt marsh and seagrass habitats. We also recently announced our intention to pilot highly protected marine areas in the Secretary of State's waters. And we're going to use ecological criteria to identify how these areas will have ecological value. So I hope people can see that we are really walking the talk domestically. And then when we look internationally, it's very clear that there's no path to net zero or long-term resilience without protecting and restoring nature on an unprecedented scale. So as others have said, land use is responsible for almost a quarter of emissions, while the loss of coastal ecosystems is releasing more carbon than most countries. But if deployed rapidly and at scale, nature-based solutions could provide up to a third of cost-effective mitigation that we need. But we know that only 3% of global climate finance is spent on nature-based solutions. Finance for nature needs to be mobilised from all sources if we're really to shift to a nature-positive economy and invest in really implementing nature-based solutions. So what are we planning for COP26 on nature? Well, we're going to be building off the high ambition from the G7. And also we're going to be mobilising that Leaders Pledge for Nature, and they're kind of nearly 90 countries that have now signed up for that, and the number of important non-state actors like WWF who are really working very closely to catalyse this action with us. So our high-level ambition for nature and land use at COP is to deliver a step change in global action in these sectors, delivering benefits for climate, biodiversity and people. Because we will show that investing in nature and land use can deliver the Paris goals by placing us on a pathway to keep 1.5 degrees within reach, by reducing emissions and sequestering carbon, and strengthening the resilience of vulnerable communities, economies and natural systems. It can also bend the curve on biodiversity loss and improve livelihoods. So we've got 4 main objectives across the COP on nature. The first one really is to help drive enhanced country commitments to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss, with showcasing country NDCs and long-term strategies, and how countries are integrating nature into core political and economic decision-making, taking forward Dasgupta. Hopefully we'll be working closely with Indigenous groups and also showcasing the role of science and innovation. Our second objective is to think about how we can increase mobilisation of public, multilateral and private finance for nature and sustainable land use, and how we can really scale up ambition, improve integration and really move towards investments that are better for nature, climate and people, thinking through both an ocean, a kind of forest and adaptation lenses in how we do that. Our third objective is about driving a step change in the economy and financial systems to drive better outcomes for nature, climate and people, reducing harmful investments and managing nature and land related risks, including subsidy reform, the MDBs, mainstreaming nature, looking at nature positive odour and thinking about the task force on nature related disclosures. And our fourth objective is thinking about leveraging commitments towards sustainable production, supply chains and consumption. So this is where we want to really build off our forest, agriculture and commodity trade dialogue, the FACT dialogue that's happening now, which is a groundbreaking partnership between countries, governments, the producer and consumer countries, which are really committed to transitioning to more sustainable commodity production. So finally, just to say this report is very important for us. It shows that really there's an increased uptake now of nature-based solutions, and which we really want to see turned into investment plans. We see greater inclusion and good inclusion of Indigenous peoples. But the most important thing, which really happened before Paris, was about kind of setting the winds of change, which is showing that this is momentum and this is a kind of a movement that now is underway, and building confidence in that, I think, which will help us to deliver for nature, climate and for people. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for sharing with us the advances in the UK domestically, peatland included in the inventory, and also the oceans, the advances on the ocean front. I think that it was very interesting when you mentioned the international side, that you want to build on the high ambition of the G7, and that's fantastic. And I see also that the 4 objectives of the UK are very aligned with some of the recommendations of the report, and that's encouraging. Thank you for your presentation. And now over to Kirsty Lopez. She's an adaptation specialist from the Ministry of Environment of Colombia, to talk about the very interesting experience of the Colombia NDC. We are also analyzing NDCs as a whole through an initiative called the NDCs We Want. And the Colombia NDC is one of the NDCs we want. It's the top rating that we have. So it was a very interesting analysis. Over to Christy.
Thank you, Fernanda, and thank you for the invitation. It's also a pleasure to be here. I just want to share some of experience of Colombia in the process of updating of the NDC and the role of the nature-based solution. First of all, the process started in 2019 with the approbation of the roadmap for the update of the NDC. We achieved with the guidance principles and the Paris Agreement. Colombia communicate is update and enhancing NDC in December 2020. Our NDC was built in a joint main with multiple stakeholders around 100 entities, public sector and private sector. We commit to reduce by 51% our greenhouse gases emission expected for 2030, which clearly puts us on path towards carbon neutrality by 2050. The NDC includes quantity and quality greenhouse gas emission measured for a total of 148 measures, 32 national measures led by ministry, 89 territorial measures led by territorial entity, 3 measures in black carbon, and 24 measures led by private sector. The NDC of Colombia not only general goals, but also describing details action through which we will achieve our objectives, which were the result of a joint and participatory process. For each of those actions, we indicate which are the entities responsible for the implementation, activities, milestones, indicators, and the relation with the Sustainable Development Goals. Consider the vulnerability of our country, where climate change is a matter of survival. We have established a comprehensive set of adaptation and risk management goals. All countries should produce an adaptation communication. The objective of the adaptation communication is catalyze action by community clearly and effectively national priorities, needs, and plans that require international support. Thus, the adaptation communication should play a role in enhancing the implementation of the adaptation action, and it should assist in achieving the global goal on adaptation and the purpose of the Paris Agreement and in the long-term goals. That is why we are one of the first countries to include in our NDC the first adaptation communication. We reflect its priorities, needs, and support required to respect to technology developed and transfer, capacity building, and financing. It contains 30 adaptation goals in fields such as ecosystem conservation and protection, planning and implementation, management of water resources, and information management, monitoring, and evaluation. The adaptation component of the NDC in this update version is more ambitious because the targets set in the previous NDC have been revised and developed into more concrete action proposal to incorporate climate change action into different levels of country planning. In contrast to the previous NDC, with more detailed action in sectors such as health, agriculture, transport, energy, housing, trade, and environment, as well as a fierce approach to the methodology for the future costing of the goals. The NDC also connects adaptation targets with the Sustainable Development Goals and Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. We know the concept of the nature-based solution has many definitions, and we don't have a consensus. However, nature-based solution approach are in different instruments such as NDC and in the formulation of the integral climate change plan environment sector and among others. Colombia recognized in the NDC the value provided by the nature-based solutions. In fact, in the NDC, the nature-based solution approach is in the measures and targets related to the ecosystem conservation and protection. For example, in mitigation, we have measures related to reducing deforestation, restoration, and hydrocarbon sector emission compensation through nature-based solution and agrosystems. And in the other hand, in adaptation, we have targets related to management of water resources, restoration in protect areas, increased protect areas, and ecosystem protection and management through planning instruments. Finally, Colombia is fully committed with climate neutrality and is working on the NDC implementation plan with a roadmap of work for all relevant stakeholders. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Another aspect that I thought it was very, very interesting of the Colombia NDC, and that also converges with our recommendations, is on participation. Colombia did quite an interesting process on engaging all kinds of stakeholders, especially indigenous and rural communities, which is very important for including nature-based solutions in NDCs. Okay, so now we will hand over to Hasib very briefly. He's one of the main authors of the report, to comment to us a little bit about the perspective of the Global South and how the Global South has been including nature in their NDCs. Over to Hasib.
Thanks, Fernanda. Thanks everyone for your great insights so far. To kick off the Q&A session, I wanted to briefly speak about how nature and nature-based solutions featured in the NDCs from the Global South. We already heard about Colombia and the experience of updating and revising the NDC by the Colombian government, which is already a great example. And as the speakers throughout this webinar mentioned, identifying and quantifying mitigation and adaptation potential of nature-based solutions and setting clear targets and measures require substantial technical as well as financial capacities and resources. And many countries in the Global South may not have these capacities and resources. But these solutions are crucial for these countries in order to achieve their climate goals and targets, and also build resilience against climate change impact that we already see all over the world. Therefore, knowledge sharing, and capacity building is crucial to ensure governments can set clear targets for nature, and also ambitious targets, and also they are able to implement these targets in a timely manner to achieve their ambitions, but also to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Nonetheless, in our review of the NDCs, of the 55 NDCs that we looked at, we saw several great examples of countries from the Global South who showed leadership in increasing their ambitions in regard to nature and nature-based solutions, as well as in clarity in integrating nature-based measures and interventions in their NDCs. This, of course, includes Colombia, but other countries such as Costa Rica, Cambodia, Chile, and others have shown how NDCs can go beyond just setting an economy-wide target for greenhouse gas reduction to include clear measures for different sectors, as well as including for nature and nature-based solutions. We also saw in our analysis that many of these countries that improved the integration of nature and nature-based solution in the updated NDCs received some support from donors, as well as international organizations who support governments all over the world, especially in the Global South, in improving their capacities and helping them set clearer targets and measures. And this already indicates, again, and I reiterate that the need that knowledge needs to be shared, capacity needs to be shared with these countries, and many of them are already showing leadership. And the rest, if such support continues, such collaboration and coordination continues, we'll have great examples of nature and nature-based solutions in the NDCs to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hasib. And now we have some questions in the chat. The first question is from Paola. Hi, Paola. She's a Panda. She works with us. And her question is for Andrea Ledward. How does the UK will address the impact overseas relating to the conversion of terrestrial, where's the question? The question, the question is gone. So yeah. Yeah, I see the question here now.
Terrestrial ecosystems other
Yeah.
terrestrial ecosystems other than forests. If
Yep.
its due diligence legislation is likely to address only forests.
Yeah, thanks, Manuel. So let me just read.
It is in answered. It will be
Yeah.
to answer. Check it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about the technical glitch. But the question is, how does the UK will address its impacts overseas relating to the conversion of terrestrial ecosystems other than forests, if its due diligence legislation is likely to address only forests?
Hello. So this relates to the fact that in the Environment Bill at the moment that's going through Parliament, we are currently legislating to bring in new due diligence legislation about the input of timber that is driving deforestation. That's where we're starting, but we recognise that clearly timber isn't the only product that drives deforestation. So soy, palm oil, cocoa, maize, there's a number of other products. So we have the ability through the Environment Bill to bring further legislation in due course relating to other commodities. We're also, I'm sure as some of you know, we have consulted on the development of a global footprint indicator and what that would look like and how we would measure the kind of global footprint of the UK's consumption. And that is very much also kind of work in progress. So we also realise that our due diligence and our kind of trade levers are only one part of our kind of toolkit essentially as well. So we are very much focused, particularly as we go into COP, to thinking about how we can use a range of levers to really tackle deforestation and to drive kind of deforestation out of supply chains globally. You'll have seen some amazing commitments in the G7 that related to this as well. So thank you for the question.
Okay. And now we have a question from an identified participant that asks, what are the next steps for the countries that are including a mention to nature-based solutions in their NDCs, but are not increasing their ambition in terms of reduction of greenhouse gases? How many updates of the NDC they can still do? Who would like to take that one? Maybe Hasib?
Yeah, I can take that one. So under the Paris Agreement, governments are supposed to increase their ambition and submit a new NDC every 5 years. The deadline for this round was last year, but many governments could not submit, and it was postponed to this year. But the next round is again 2025 and then 2030, and it goes like that. The idea is that the governments increase their ambition with each submission. And when we say they integrate nature-based solutions or increase ambition in regards to nature-based solutions, does not necessarily mean that their overall economy-wide greenhouse gas targets are also ambitious. So that's one side of that coin, and nature-based solution is also another part of that coin to say. They are supposed to increase their ambition to reduce emissions, but nature-based solution is a tool that could contribute to achieving those ambitious goals that they set. I hope that answered. If anyone would like to add, you're most welcome.
All right, thank you very much. So I will pose a question to all speakers to hear from all of you. So maybe to Manuel first. Manuel, what argument would you use to convince countries to include nature in their NDCs? What would be that killer argument for you?
Probably two main reasons, Fernanda. The first one, it is for sure related to what is your main source of emission. So it is clear that if your main source it is related to nature, nature should be the focus of your NDC. And that is happening mostly in developing countries, mostly in countries located in the tropical area of the world. No? So that, in my point of view, it is one of those reasons. But the second one, it is, I'm not sure if I am translating well the economía de escala, no? Scale economy, that by addressing nature and climate, no, you can create co-benefits. So it is the most effective way to address both crises at the same time, no? But for sure, to do that, we do need to make all the governance and institutional arrangement to be more effective on that. And also, this is related to the question that the second question that I don't. It was an identified person who made it and who mentioned how can we move ambition, no, for those countries that have already identified MBS in their NDC. That could be related to enabling conditions. You know that when you move actions into the domestic level, things are used to changing because the reality, political, judicial, legal system of each one of the countries. So it could be possible that some countries need some enabling conditions. One, for example, that it is key in many countries, it is to have the ministries of finance identifying ways to promote public and private investment in those kind of interventions, because you know how many limits that public budget are used to having. So the point it is that to open that system into this kind of intervention, that is one enabling condition that could really lever more kind of nation-based solutions action into the domestic level. And there could be, in some countries, they are thinking that probably they need to promote a law. Again, it depends on the reality of each one of the countries. So that depends on the analysis that we could do for each one of those.
Thank you, Manuel. So Francisca, to you now. Did anything in the analysis surprise you? What findings give you hope or concern you?
I think what was most surprising to me was that there's still so much more attention going to forests, while these other ecosystems like marine ecosystems just have so much potential. So I feel like there's more work to do. I mean, there's obviously also much more work to do related to forests and agriculture. But I think that was something that stood out to me.
Okay, that's very interesting. And that also strikes me when we talk about nature-based solutions. There are other ecosystems that are so important and should be included. So Andrea, so you talked about the national elections of the UK and what the UK wants to achieve as a presidency internationally. But my question to you would be, what can the UK do to incentivize other countries to include nature-based solutions in their NDCs? I think you are on mute.
Sorry, there had to be something. I think the first thing is just to say we're obviously using our convening power as much as we can. So the Leaders Pledge for Nature, the G7 presidency are very important in that respect. So using that to kind of build coalitions and momentum. The second thing is, I think, really helping with the data and the metrics point that others have mentioned. So the Dasgupta report that was published, but also the Task Force on Nature related financial disclosure, we think is absolutely critical to try and get measures of risk related to nature much more fully embedded in the financial and economic system. I think the third thing is then around finance. Obviously, absolutely essential to think about how we mobilize finance from a range of different sources. And we are working both as a shareholder on many of the multilateral development banks and with others to think about how they might mainstream nature within their operations, but also thinking about the $100 billion target, which we're obviously very focused on for our COP presidency, and thinking within that, how much of that can be both nature and adaptation and nature and kind of mitigation, and what's the role, and working to build confidence about what that looks like. But really, I think it's also just finally, it is very much about talking about what nature-based solutions are. You know, clearly in some places it's a more contested term, and trying to kind of show that actually it is the same thing as core kind of sustainable land use and transitions and forests and food systems and the ocean in language that countries are more maybe more familiar with within the climate context, and join up the debates. I feel like in different fora, often there's slightly different conversations happening with slightly different language. And I think helping to kind of translate a little across those different fora and build confidence that actually these are, this is important because they're also investable. They will bring in finance to countries. Investment will flow. in the future if we can get this right.
Okay, thank you, Andrea.
Let me, Fernanda, make a short comment.
Okay, you have 50 seconds. Just kidding.
50 seconds. Yeah. In some way, nature-based solutions, it is still a non-formal tool in the process. So what I'm trying to say it is that it has not been strongly recognized by UNFCCC process, CBD process, among some others. Probably the first time ever in which we have heard a mention of NBS, it has been in COP25 for the Standing Committee on Finance, without a definition. So the point it is how much we could lever and promote more ambition through nation-based solutions if this concept it is well formalized in the political, in the global political process. No, so that is a key element. I am all the time wondering what it should be our expectation to have nation-based solutions well reflected, for example, in the decision of COP26 or in the global biodiversity framework of the CBD, because immediately that formalization could help countries to understand better and to really adopt it, because now it is a formal piece of the ambitious process.
Thanks, Manuel, and you incredibly kept to the time. Fantastic. So, Kirsty, please. So my question to you, and then we'll close, is what would Colombia expect from COP26 regarding nature? What would be a result that Colombia would celebrate?
The COP26 nature-based solution campaign will be led by the government of Colombia under the guidance of the UK presidency. This campaign will provide opportunity to efficiently integrate the Paris Agreement, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and Sustainable Development Goals. And the nature-based solution can help us to address biodiversity and contribute significantly to climate change mitigation and adaptation, generate broader social and ecosystem benefit. And this is what is expected in the COP26.
Okay, very good. Thank you all for these rich presentations and discussion. This has been very interesting. I would encourage you to read our report that has been posted to the chat. I would highlight that we have recommendations both for the COP26 and what the COP26 needs to do. And that relates a lot to what Manuel said. We want to see a stronger recognition of nature-based solutions, probably a process to ground nature-based solutions in the convention. And of course, finance, new and additional sources of finance, and recommendations also at the national level regarding participation, regarding prioritizing nature-based solutions that address mitigation and adaptation with co-benefits. And we also think it's very important that countries submit their NDCs in advance. There is a countdown that we are starting today till July 31st, because we want to see all NDCs or as many NDCs as possible in the synthesis report, because this is very important. So we have a picture of the world and we can respond to that with the Paris Ambition Cycle. Thank you very much for your attention today. Thanks to our fantastic speakers, and let's read the report and appropriate of those conclusions. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye,
everyone.